to recognize mayors for brief introductions, and then we will begin our program. Mayor Hancock, if you would begin.
Michael Hancock, Mayor of Denver.
Mayors. Okay.
Mayor Williams, Steve Williams, the Mayor of Huntington, West Virginia.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for being here. And we have a lot to talk about today. Mayor, thank you, Mayor.
Betty Rush from Lake Worth Beach, Palm Beach County, Florida.
All right, welcome.
I'm Mayor Broderick from Anderson, Indiana.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor Hardy from the City of Kinston, North Carolina.
Thank you, Mayor. A whole lot of mayors. Fantastic. So, today we will be discussing how cities are using their American Rescue Plan dollars to support food security and health equity for their residents. And we will also discuss innovations in how cities have increased their enrollment in SNAP. I have said frequently over the last 22 months that everything about our COVID hasn't been bad. We have learned how we can invest in making families more secure, food secure, housing secure. We've learned how interventions with what cities do in terms of our distribution of health resources can be more equitable, and I think at the end of the day, we would have not only bent the curve around COVID in many cases, we would have made communities healthier, and we would have strengthened our infrastructure. So part of what we're all thinking about as city leaders is how this type of effort is sustainable beyond the American Rescue Plan, or we're thinking about, I see Scott shaking his head, or we're thinking about the next iteration of the rescue plan. So with that, I want to turn to Mayor Scott for introductory remarks, as well as his discussion about how the city of Baltimore is using its ARP funds.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. Mayor Bowser, ladies and gentlemen, is the mayor of my second favorite city, Washington, D.C. It is an honor really to co-chair of this task force with you, and I want to thank you for your leadership. I'm really excited to be here amongst mayors and friends to talk about how in Baltimore we resolve food system issues through our COVID-19 emergency food response, and really what we think is a very innovative offer project to improve food access and food equity during and after COVID-19. I won't spend too much time talking about COVID, but it's important to provide, I think, a high-level overview of our efforts as they greatly impact where we're going in the future. So just some facts for you guys. Prior to COVID, 1 in 4 residents in Baltimore, or 154,000 people, were utilizing SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. This number increased by 25% as a direct result of COVID-19 and the pandemic. So over to today, over 1/3 of our residents, 200,000 people in the city are using SNAP in Baltimore. In response to the pandemic, we developed an emergency food response, utilizing, as we do in every single thing that we do in government, a equity lens through food environment mapping, census data, and monthly SNAP data. And using that data, we are prioritized distributing fresh produce to communities living in healthy food priority areas. These are low-income neighborhoods without access to grocery stores that have high SNAP participation rates. I'm thinking about snow already. A crucial component of that strategy was to mitigate COVID-19 transmission by distributing produce outdoors. We did that in our churches and community organizations, schools, and rec centers across the city. And I'm really proud to share that throughout this program we have distributed over 1.5 million food boxes, including 1.2 million produce boxes since March of 2020. And we provided over 143 million servings of fresh fruits and vegetables to residents across Baltimore. And we continue to do 17,000 produce boxes a week at over 80 sites in the city, and we'll continue that through at least March 31st, or as long as FEMA continues to fully reimburse us for those funds. But to date, we've really spent over $33 million on food boxes. And I want to move now, as you have that understanding of where we're talking about as a city about offer funds. We are putting $8 million of offer towards food insecurity issues in Baltimore. And our vision is really to address our food system as a whole to ensure nutritional security and build healthy communities throughout Baltimore. And when you represent the birthplace of racial redlining, you understand those stark realities that we have. And we've created a comprehensive plan that promotes food resiliency and food equity, increases access to affordable food, and addresses the food supply chain failure by building the indigenous and people of color local food chain, something that we have ignored for too long. And we're going to use data that we obtained through this offer project to create food system policies for the future, so that we're not just looking at this as something that we're doing now because everyone does it and the feds are giving us money. Our proposal provides a framework for this plan and is comprised of 5 key pillars. Pillar 1 is continue that produce box distribution to ensure residents have consistent access to fresh fruits and vegetables. 2, increase online SNAP participation by 50% while promoting digital equity and providing fruit and vegetable incentives to our residents. We in Baltimore, we have worked on online SNAP advocacy for years, and we are now in the implementation phase, thankfully. Thank you, Holly, for all that great work that you did for us. This effort is a direct response to having those 200,000 residents that we spoke about earlier. Our program will provide online vouchers for SNAP recipients that can be used to obtain this fresh food. And pillar 3 is expanding nutrition initiatives offered at farmers markets. We have a lot of great farmers markets in Baltimore. We want to expand the access to folks from neighborhoods who do not have the opportunity to buy produce typically. 4, implement a produce prescription program for food as medicine at MedStar Hospital. This is in South Baltimore. If you think about a healthy food priority area, this is the poster child. It literally sits out there by itself across the bridge from the rest of the city, and there is no access via public transportation or otherwise unless you go into a total different county to buy fresh food. And pillar 5 is build our BIPOC local food supply chain by supporting our growers and improving access to locally and regionally grown produce. We think through this innovative way that we'll be able to lay the groundwork of how we can continue to tackle this issue that we all have been able to focus on as a result of the pandemic. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And we're going to have an opportunity to ask you some questions about what's happening in Baltimore. And more than that, how we continue to focus on what comes after COVID and what type of supports that we will have. And in the meantime, I want to turn to Mayor of Denver, Colorado, and our friend, Michael Hancock.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser, and to you and Mayor Scott. Thank you for the opportunity to come and talk about this issue of food insecurity. I will share you that, just like Mayor Scott, understanding the insecurity challenge before the pandemic was important to us as well. We estimated that about 11% of Denver residents were food insecure prior to the pandemic. During and following the pandemic, or still ongoing part of the pandemic, about a third of our residents are food insecure. And which means that we had to think about how we would begin to help those who never found themselves in the space before, as well as continue to help those who were in the space prior to the pandemic. I want y'all to think back to 2019, actually early 2020, March of 2020, when many of us as mayors had to make that tough call to shut our cities down. And I remember the day so very well. And the first thing we thought about, of course, is that we were going to disrupt people's livelihoods. That some folks would lose their jobs, some folks simply would go home and continue to collect a check. Those were typically your higher wage earners. But we knew that families would be impacted. A couple of days later, a conversation began to emerge about what about those kids who were sent home from school? Their schools were shut down. And like that, me, as I was growing up, that was the only time I could really look forward to a meal, was when I got into school. That was severely disrupted as well. And Denver runs after-school programming, and we serve 75,000 to 90,000 children a night. with after-school meals. So they come to our rec programs and we have a warm meal for them while they're there. That too was disrupted. And so not only our most vulnerable disrupted, but we have kids who come after school and sometimes get a nice hot meal. And as latchkey kids, probably the only meal they got for the night was what we provided for them. And then we started doing food distribution efforts. Many of my staff took it upon themselves to start arranging, along with some of our food pantries and food banks, do food distribution services. And we were seeing people come through the line, and like many mayors here, I'm sure you went out and you were handing out baskets to people as they drove through the line. And just like conversations with me, many people would say something like, I never imagined myself in a line like this. I'm usually out there with you volunteering, giving food away. And so we saw a change in our city. And so what we decided to do with our, not just even our ARPA money, but our CARES money, which was to begin to invest in the nonprofits or the apparatus that was already in place to serve people who were food insecure. How do we boost them to serve even a greater population of clients who are going to need them? And so we took our CARES money and then ultimately again our ARPA and some of our ARPA money and began to invest in that apparatus. We didn't want to create a new wheel. We wanted to invest in those nonprofits that were already had the infrastructure in place to serve folks. We created an arm in Denver called the Denver Emergency Food Relief Fund. And it was that fund that helped those nonprofits boost their capacity to serve those who were food insecure and those who were also new to the system. As a result, we gave away, as part of our CARES dollars, the initial $3 million just to help folks get food and get through the very difficult time that they were facing for the first time, many times in their lives. We served over 2 million meals as part of that initial phase. And then as we came along with ARPA, again, we further boosted that apparatus to continue to feed them. As I turn this back over to Mayor Bowser, let me share with you something that we want to do, that we're working on now. There is and you got to look this up, it's the most amazing concept I've ever seen. In Atlanta, Georgia, there's a nonprofit social enterprise lady named Jasmine who started an organization called Gooder. Gooder. And she brilliantly came up with the concept of putting grocery stores in schools. And it's not just like, you walk in, you find a table full of clothes and food. Now this is like it was like a 7-Eleven in a grocery in a school. So she partnered with the school, the principal gave her a room. She got some wrapper like you would find in Atlanta, Georgia, of course, who invested, right? Who invested in the store. And you walk in and it looks like a grocery store. It's got a meat freezer, it's got, your non-perishable items on the counter, on the shelf. And every kid in the school got a grocery bag. Every kid. No matter what their capacity, every kid. So there was no distinguishing any kid who walked away with a grocery bag. These parents and those kids can go in every day without limit and get groceries for their families. They can have an app. The parents can send in the list that they need. Kids come by, swoop it up, and walk out the door. And so we're looking to duplicate that model in Atlanta. I was there not too long ago. She did a call recently in Denver where we had philanthropists on the phone, corporations, and they're like, we want to do this. It only costs about $80,000 per store. And so that's the sort of thing we're looking at, how we meet the kids and their families where they are. And you don't have to have a kid in the school. You can just live in a neighborhood. And we want to be able to fill that gap. So I'll stop there. We'll answer some of the questions in just a moment.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, thank you. And that's a great discussion. And speaking of Atlanta, I want to acknowledge the former mayor of Atlanta, Shirley Franklin, who is back there. And thank you for being here, Mayor, and thank you always for your leadership. And Mayor Hancock, I just kind of want to frame my short remarks in the way that he talked about us when we've been dealing with food security these last 24 months. So for us, we had the phase of this that we just focused on relief.
Yeah.
We shut down our cities, kids went home, our hospitality workers especially were impacted here in the district. And we had a lot of workers who didn't qualify for any relief, any of the federal relief. And so what were we going to do with those people who we thought them and their kids would be without meals? And we actually, in the early months, our emergency posture was for the government to become a food distribution point. We filled our warehouses with food. We had one stream of our emergency activity solely focused on food delivery. And more than that, we're dealing with this pandemic where people were in isolation, where they literally couldn't go out of their homes. They couldn't go to the groceries. They couldn't go to the food pickup points. So we had a stream of work that was focused on how do we go to someone's house to make sure that they had food. And that none of us mayors could have done any of that work without really dedicated public servants and contractors who were working in person in the first days of this pandemic. And that was really important to the relief work that we did. But also the part of an emergency response is how do you pivot from those? Every phase of the pandemic isn't the same. And directly having food distribution at schools, at churches, with nonprofits was very important to us. But like Michael has said, it was also important to get back to a more normal distribution process of working with our food providers, giving them additional funds, helping them with whether it was warehousing or staff that was there to help get food out. And so today we can say that we're to pre-pandemic levels of food insecurity, but that's not certainly good enough. We still, before the pandemic, we had too many homes that were insecure. The next part of what we did, in addition to using CARES, is we really looked at our local budgets. And I think that probably all the mayors had in that first year when we shut down, had to redo some things with our budget. And then we thought that we wouldn't have enough money for most things. And luckily, by the following year, we had the types of funds that we needed to get things done. Another important part of this relief for food we should also talk about was for our restaurants. The thing that I think that we all noticed, especially in the early days, is how the demand shifted and how the food supply, who knew about all these food supply issues that would come when your restaurants are shut down, and everybody is now eating at home, and the demand on the groceries is significant, so we all live that experience. But it was important for us for that food supply to open up and for our restaurants to be able to get back in business. So part of our emergency assistance for relief and recovery was to make sure that our restaurants were funded and could keep their people employed, but also keep their food supply going. We are fortunate that a lot of people, this pandemic, like in most places, affected people very unevenly. So a lot of people could spend and buy food and had no problems, and other people, especially in our hospitality sector, were relying on a lot of food assistance. Our restaurants also stepped up in another way to take care of their own, and we saw that type of philanthropy develop, where restaurateurs were creating opportunities for restaurant workers to come for food assistance, and that was important. The big thing, and I want to recognize Oma Balkis, who is the director of our food policy office, and all of the work that she's done around building the infrastructure for DC to support good food. But we also, what ARP allowed us to do was to make really transformative budget moves and to do things that we've always wanted to do, but now we had just really significant dollars to do it. Like, for example, in my most recent budget, we included $58 million that we call the food access fund. I always get the name of what we called it off. But that is allowing us to be a partner to the private sector in areas of the city that have been lacking good food sources. For us, we have, in some parts of DC, we're in Ward 2 now, And you go around the neighborhoods in Ward 2, I say this, you can throw a rock this way and hit a grocery store, throw a rock this way and hit 3 grocery stores, and that way you'll hit 4 grocery stores. But then I have 2 wards in the city where, you have to really throw a rock to find a grocery store. And so that's what we've been working on to make sure that we can bring groceries to Ward 7 and Ward 8. We have a strategy that I'm very committed to, and that is finding good retailers in one part of the city, like in Ward 2 or Ward 1 or wherever else they're successful, partnering with them to open a second or third location in Ward 7 and 8. And we announced in Ward 8 recently that it's open a smaller grocer called Good Food Market. In Ward 7, we're also supporting various ways of large-scale development that's bringing Lidl, the first Lidl, to the District of Columbia in Ward 7. Similarly, we're investing some of that fund in sit-down grocers that have not located, sit-down restaurants that have not located in Ward 7 and 8, but may have a successful model in other parts of the city. Those are businesses we want to invest in, businesses that will hire DC residents and will serve DC residents with quality food. The next thing I want to mention before I turn to Stacy is talking about some other like administrative and technological things that we learned during the pandemic, where we actually said you're eligible and you don't have to come down and tell us you're eligible or show up at a waiting room and be exposed and have our workers exposed. And so there may be key learnings moving forward about how eligibility is determined and sustained, where I say frequently, our customers are different. They have a higher demand of us when it comes to technology. If you can get a mortgage in 8 minutes, you shouldn't have to stand in line at 5 a.m. to get food stamps, right? Should you? No. And I think that we've learned in the last 20 months, certainly our challenge in DC is to use technology to make a lot of these services faster so people are getting the things that they are entitled to. That will make their lives easier, the kids' lives easier, and all of them healthy. Finally, I'll say that we, with all of these investments, we have to demand of ourselves that we're healthier, that we're not just passing out these dollars here or there, but we're doing it in a way that is strategic, that is going to lead to healthier outcomes for our residents. This pandemic has laid bare that not all Americans enjoy the same healthy access to healthy lifestyles, be it food or housing or education or job opportunity. So we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with ARP, hopefully with Build Back Better and other federal investments that will allow us to have people live healthier lives. So with that, I'm going to turn to Stacy Dean, and she is the Deputy Undersecretary at the United States USDA, and she's going to talk to us about food security, and the COVID impact of the work that you do. So thank you, Stacy.
Oh, thank you so much, Mayor Bowser, and I'll just repeat what I told you privately earlier. A huge thank you for your leadership as a longtime DC resident. Incredibly proud to live here under your stewardship during the pandemic. It's so wonderful to be here today and also to hear these incredibly inspiring stories and experiences about what's happening on the ground level. Of course, sitting where I sit at USDA, it's a different perch, and it's about how do we provide resources, flexibility, and create the terms and conditions under which these kinds of innovative ideas can occur. So I'm going to talk quickly about our pandemic response, but hopefully we can pivot to how do we take what we've learned out of the pandemic into the future, because I think that will be a terrific conversation. So what I want to do is talk about what we did, think about what's next, both in terms of opportunities and challenges, and then of course hear from you all. I think you've heard, but I'll just put some specific numbers on it, that the pandemic had an extraordinary impact on hunger and hardship. When the president took office, census data showed that 29 million adults in households with 12 million kids reported not having enough food to eat in a given week. The numbers were almost twice, 2 to 3 times that, the rates across African American, Latino, and indigenous communities. Again, laying bare, as the mayor said, and exposing disparities that already existed, but exacerbating them. And hunger is just an extraordinary hardship and unacceptable hardship that any individual should have to endure, short or long, with really profound short and long-term consequences, and obviously huge impacts on entire communities. So the president charged us, basically in the second day in office, to do more, to build upon what Congress had already done. And I think the things that we did fit into 3 categories, and I'll just run through them quickly. First, first was really to get resources into the hands of people directly who needed them. Second, to leverage more federal support for programs that were in the community, so food banks in schools, for example. And then third, to provide flexibility. So I'll just tick through these quickly so we can think about them, because part of what we want to do is talk about what happens when these things end and what can we bring forward. So first, in terms of putting money into the hands of individuals, one of the first 2 big things happened. One was creating a thing called Pandemic EBT, or PEBT, which was meant to, and is, a response to provide families with an electronic debit card that has money for groceries to replace the value of school meals lost while schools were closed. Together, USDA, districts, cities, states stood up this program during the pandemic. There were 3 federal law changes to it. No one had any staff to do this, either at the federal or the state level, but we all worked to do it. And over the past year, it's provided or made available $40 billion to households with kids. We need those households to use that money, though, right? The cards with $40 billion in resources have been issued, and PEBT will continue on for this school year and the coming summer. And this program worked. It took a while. It was complicated, and it was slower than anybody wanted it to be. But once the resources were coming out, research from Brookings found that food hardship for low-income children decreased by 30%, right? Because we gave families the money. Another really important change, which was a combination of efforts by the Biden-Harris administration and Congress, was to increase SNAP for food stamps. So first was all households have been brought to the maximum level of the benefit for their household size. On top of that, Congress increased that level with a 15% boost. And then the Biden-Harris administration was concerned that the very poorest households were already at the maximum level. They didn't actually get additional purchasing power, right? So that's backwards, that in the time of the pandemic, the poorest households are those who are already at the maximum needed action. So we took action to ensure that every household got at least a $95 a month boost. All told, this increased across the country SNAP, the monthly issuance in SNAP by 80%. So an additional about $4 billion a month. And then on top of that, we worked as a more fundamental long-term change at Congress's direction, reevaluated the basis for the SNAP benefit, and which is called the Thrifty Food Plan. It was very thrifty. We wanted to be a little less thrifty and make sure that it was adequate to purchase a low-cost healthy diet, and bump SNAP benefits by about 20%. So money into the hands of people that need it. We also have done a lot to increase resources to the programs that are helping folks in more congregate settings. So significant new resources for food banks, about over $1 billion in additional resources for food banks this year. And schools, heading into this school year, where schools are virtually is the wrong word to use for schools right now, where nearly all schools are open, although Omicron notwithstanding. But yet they had to offer school meals in a pandemic environment where congregating may not have been, it's clearly not a good idea, as we see here, or and with supply chain issues and labor difficulties, they just didn't have enough money. So we increased the federal reimbursement rate, made meals universally free, which I think speaks to some of the issues Mary Hancock talked about in terms of stigma. And now this school year, about an additional $11 billion or 30% increase. That's not to be applauded in the sense of it's extra. It is to manage and deal with the challenges that schools have right now. But we're learning as in this environment with these extra resources. And then, of course, there was flexibility for program operators. So as Mayor Bowser talked about, for many programs where you've got to go in person for that SNAP interview or WIC where you see the clinician with the baby, we had to create flexibility to pivot away from a required in-person experience or required congregate feeding experience, say for summer feeding, and offer our local program operators more options. So all of which, some of which was necessitated by the pandemic, but I think we've learned a lot about different ways to do things. So as we look ahead to where we go next, I think there's an opportunity and a challenge. I'll start with the challenge, one of which is this additional funding and the flexibility. We will lose that authority from Congress. And I think all of us need to ready ourselves for a SNAP program that can shrink by 80%. That will not impact every household the same, but certainly will impact them in communities dramatically. We can certainly engage with Congress about when is the right time for that to occur, but there are going to be some shifts. We'll also lose a lot of the flexibilities when the public health emergency ends, flexibilities that we may have come very accustomed to and are staffed to. So again, that's something that we ought to be talking about with amongst ourselves and then with Congress. And on the opportunity front, clearly there's the learning from all of this. The other thing I'll just add there as my last thought is when I think about the opportunity, it isn't just with respect to the food systems or how we're engaging with households that are food insecure need our help right within the food program space. It's all of the programs. So for example, this year, we think that families with children eligible for the child tax credit, right, the new expanded child tax credit that didn't claim it, are families who had new babies, right? They had infants. So we know that WIC is a place where families with new babies go, right? That's a place where we can reach them to talk about the child tax credit. And that is that kind of space where we're talking to people as people and not as recipients of programs at the end of a federal silo. This is obviously where mayors extraordinary, this is your job, right? And pulling all of this in and connecting with the public in the way that they need versus in the way we would like to dictate. And I think that's also something where the Biden-Harris administration wants to make lasting change, is to respond to people's needs and communities' needs rather than to deliver programs as designed in this house. So how do we pull the pieces together and be more responsive? How do we talk about the CTC in the WIC clinic or distribute masks through food banks? So I'm basically pulling the pieces together. We have a lot to learn from you all on that, and this is an administration that is incredibly receptive to how we need to change to be responsive to families' needs. So with that, I will stop. There's so much more to talk about, but I think it's an important framework for discussion later. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Stacy. And now we are going to hear from Ellen Vollinger, who is the SNAP Director at the Food Research Acquisition
Nation. Any thoughts?
Well, I want to put that to your other mayors first before.
I have a lot of thoughts, but share with my West Virginia neighbors.
Yes.
Because I'm just completely galled by this notion that we're taking this child tax money that people are getting and have relied on, and now we're taking that away. And we know that a lot of people, all the studies show, used it for food, used it for shoes for their kids, and now we can see that just go away. And on top of this, having this decrease in food, and as you were talking, I'm always interested to be able to show how did this investment change change something that we're all interested in? And it's been too short a time. How did it improve health outcomes? How did it, help kids at school? If we have some ways to measure, as Ellen did very quickly, saying $1 million laws means X amount that's not circulating to the grocery store, means that because you're now not having this benefit, you're using your cash, which you would have used your cash to do X. So all of these things, I think, I'm interested to see, and perhaps we're too close to it, to see what impact have these dollars had, whether it's economy, whether it's health, whether it's housing security, all of these things. I think we need to demonstrate. Now, in my city, I don't know about yours, what the discussion will become is how can we replace those federal dollars with local dollars?
That's where I'm
Right.
leading, because we have not had an ongoing program to support that, because while I'm in office, we're going to make sure that we're doing it, and I'm going to make it less hard for anybody then to have to stop it, or even think that they would stop it eventually.
Right, so we'll have to think about how do you replace that with, if the number is $80 a month, that's a big bite for us to take, locally. So we'll start thinking about that, or how we're leveraging with our partners, some other investment that we're making, to get more food in. Mayor?
If I can add into this, because Mayor Bowser said something that kind of reminded me of something that we did in Denver. The reality is a hungry child is more expensive than a fed child. It costs more to take care of a hungry child than it does to feed a child, I guess. One of the points that was made in my conference call last week with the Gooder CEO, Gavin Crow, was that a teacher can't teach through hunger. And so to Mayor Bowser's point, the exponential cost of not ensuring that every child, every family has access to nutritional food on a regular basis is way more than making sure they have the food. Denver in 2017 maybe passed a sales tax for rich people.
And I would just add that I think Mayor Bowser, Mr. Mayor, you said it perfectly. We have to just be open and honest with our residents, right? We have to tell folks that this is the issue, and if we don't reprioritize how we spend our dollars, this issue will continue to go. And that's going to be a tough conversation. We know Mr. Mayor's talking about a localized sales tax. We know many jurisdictions will be included by the states from going there. But we have to, as mayors, I think, lead in, which is an incredibly tough time. And I think all of us know that if, our states, and if, we appreciate now what the federal government is doing, stepped up in a bigger way, especially in the beginning, we wouldn't be seeing some of the issues. And we can't rely that they're ever going to do that again, right? We have to operate under the understanding that at the end of the day, folks are going to be looking at us. And to do that, we're going to have to make tough decisions and changes how we are spending our own dollars and reprioritizing our limited budgets. But we also, I think, this time requires us to do some things that a lot of times we don't do. And that's have open, honest conversations with our constituency about this is where we work with this issue, this is where we were able to go with these things, but this money isn't going to come forever. And if we don't do something here together, locally, as a city, as a mayor, working with our partners, we're going to see these other things happen. And it's not just about education, right? We know that when children are hungry, they don't learn, they don't succeed in life, and we know they end up on the wrong side of the law. They end up, in violent crime. So many of the things that we can really say yet again and paint when you think about these inequities that we all knew existed, but that this pandemic just showed for some people who just had their heads in the sand how real they were. This is where this is coming from, and we have to continue to invest in it. Or the things that so many people in this country fear the most, they aren't going to get better just because you're ignoring it. They're going to get significantly worse.
I think all of this underscores on a broader sense the burden of the rescue plan on local government and the opportunity. Because think the last time that this type of investment was made in the nation 80 plus years ago, coming out of the Depression, the government came in and provided help, and it proved to be somewhat effective, and it stayed with us for 70 plus years. What has been developed in the last year or two with the rescue plan money and the CARES Act money and such, but particularly the rescue plan money coming directly to the cities, is setting a standard that if we show that we know how to do it better than they can here, that's the standard for the next 80 years. That's the burden on us as mayors, and each of you have, I think, articulated very effectively what all of us can take back is that what are those things that we need to be doing that we traditionally haven't had to do or needed to do. And again, we know that the laboratories of innovation are in the cities.
Yeah.
Frankly, the burden is on us.
Let me make this suggestion, Mayor, based on some of the legislation that Ellen has discussed and some things that the administration may be able to do during the emergency. Let's put together some ideas and recommendations. I'll circulate it with the committee, and we'll give it to the conference for endorsement of suggestions that the mayors can make or advocate for, so that we're either like using this cliff or eliminating the cliff. So give us some time to work on some recommendations for the conference to sign on to. Okay. Yes, Mayor.
Well, Madam Mayor, you just actually answered the question. I was just going to respond to the second way that you just did about the legislation, rallying behind the legislation, those numbers you pulled out from the House bills stated. So I just wanted to say this also. I would love to see what a blueprint look like for the grocery stores and the schools. I would love to see it.
Pushing for. Is it further extensions of the emergency or delinking the benefits in some way from the emergency? Is it a piece of legislation, a budget, specific budget ask? What is the specific thing we're advocating for?
Well, I can tell you that our champions in Congress have identified, and they had identified some of these things even pre-pandemic as important, because the pandemic did show gaps in coverage and gaps in SNAP adequacy. One of the premier ones, aside from working with your states to make sure they continue to leverage the emergency allotments while they're there, there's a bill that Congresswoman Adams has with Senator Gillibrand that would improve the basic benefits in SNAP by probably about another 15%. Take the cap off the shelter deduction. So many of your families with children have high housing costs, but SNAP doesn't give them the benefit of their full housing costs. So this would be a big one, I think, for cities. And it would improve, some other things. But that's one bill that's incredibly important. It's HR 4077 S 2192. We have all of this up on the FRAC website. A second one is Representative Barbara Lee's bill, because one of the other important features of the pandemic relief, and again, this gets back to what we talked about 2 years ago on the reg fight. The Trump administration tried to make it much harder to get SNAP benefits to people who were struggling with joblessness or underemployment. During the pandemic, a 3-month time limit on benefits for that population has been suspended while the pandemic is going on. When the pandemic health declaration goes away, some people will potentially face a 3-month limit on their SNAP benefits if they don't have sufficient hours of work that they're documenting. Barbara Lee's bill would get rid of that time limit entirely. That's HR 1753. College students right now have a somewhat better pathway to access for SNAP because of temporary changes that were made by Congress and the administration. That ends when the pandemic health declaration ends. And so it's going to be much harder without a law change to figure out how to keep those college students better connected with SNAP. We know it's so important for their long-term financial stability to be able to get a college education. And that bill is HR 1919. It's Representative Gomez in the Senate. It's also Gillibrand as a 2515. And the last bill I'll mention is that Mayor Bowser, I'm sure among those who couldn't get aid through some of the federal relief, there are non-citizens who are denied access to many of the safety net programs. And Representative Jay Paul and others have a bill, HR 5227, which is Lift the Bar Act, because too many legal immigrants are kept from accessing SNAP and some other important public benefit programs until they've been here for 5 years. That doesn't make any sense. And so lift the bar. Those are things that, whether we see a pathway to get them added to any of the bills that might start to move during COVID, the last thing I'll say is that all of these are important for the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is only a year away. It's called the 2023 Farm Bill. That 5-year cycle comes awfully fast. But had we not, as a community in the Conference of Mayors, been so stout in defending the structure and the funding for SNAP, it never could have enrolled as many people as quickly, and we wouldn't have had that framework to build around. And as difficult as Stacy said, pandemic EPT was to stand up, one of the reasons it was even possible was because that structure of the SNAP benefit system already existed, and that didn't have to be completely created anew. So, again, we're looking at what we do now, but also how do we build to the 2023 Farm Bill.
I was just going to follow up with a question for you, Stacy. In your remarks, you talked about the need for cities to prepare for the day when we no longer have this as a health revolution. In your opinion, what are some things that cities and mayors would be thinking about and putting in place now for us to still be able to provide this access beyond the emergency declaration?
Well, I think some of the things that you talked about that you're doing with the flexible funds from ARPA is important, right? To strengthen the food system, strengthen the emergency response. Nothing one does there can make up for, right? A withdrawal of resources that are so significant on the SNAP front. So there, I think the more we can, right? You don't want to scare participants until it's that moment, and when the public health emergency ends, basically we will have one more month. But I think it is. So as Ellen says, first of all, there's always the continuing the conversation with Congress. I think for in response to your question about the president's intention would be, well, it was the Build Back Better Act, right? We put a lot of cash resources in families' hands to help. But I think we need to be thinking about how to communicate. There's so many changes that are coming at households. But just think about the messaging around the pandemic and where we are, for example, with masks and open and closed out. But when someone's their actual household monthly income is going to swing dramatically, they need information about that. So I think that's one thing, is making sure as many people as possible understand what's happening, why, so we can all answer questions. And then ideally be thinking about how do we help people buffer, because my guess is that a lot of elderly households, for example, on Social Security fixed income, they are now getting a much larger SNAP benefit. That means they can use cash for other things, give themselves more financial security. So when the SNAP goes away, that'll be a huge impact on their budget. So the more we can tell them in advance, help them to prepare, I don't think it doesn't solve for it. At least I understand I'm not saying that, but I think we don't want to see folks just hit in 1 month. So that would be, and I guess I would love other folks' ideas who are in the community about how there are some states that have already gone through this, and I've seen some of these.
Sure, well, why don't we open up the floor? Mayors, any ideas you want to put on the table?
I'm Steve Williams, Mayor of Huntington, West Virginia. I'm a little frustrated in this regard. And I think every mayor here will identify with this thought. When there are people suffering in our communities, it's my responsibility to take care of them. They're our people. Here's where my frustration is that the uncertainty that we seem to have is through federal programs, even sometimes state programs, where the SNAP benefits have increased, and then once the emergency is taken away, they drop back. I hate being a mayor and not being able to fix them. So the conversations I've been having with the individuals that are running our food banks and such in the area is that I've got rescue plan money that's one-time money, and help me partner with you to identify how I can make sure that we're bringing that money, one-time money, that has a long-term fix. Not that it stops having its effectiveness once the money has been spent. One-time money, work on it so that it fixes the system, at least in some way that we are able to control. Then the next step is that then partner with me so that I'm not depending upon what's coming out of Washington. I'd love it to be coming out of Mayor Ballard's Washington. Work with me so that I can be a partner, so there can be a recurring expenditure that I'm putting in place to assure that these individuals are being taken care of. If a child or a senior is going hungry in my town, that's my responsibility. So how do we as mayors take this on so that we're not sitting there and having, frankly, it frustrates me to feel that I have to explain to someone the realities of life. What can we do to help ease those realities so that if there's some, I'll clean it up, some less than enlightened individuals aren't willing to make the decisions that can be a permanent fix, then what can we as mayors lay as a foundation for our nation that if we have enlightened mayors, then we can have an enlightened